still getting me food. Sarah's still there. Who's she with? Nicole and no, they're still there. I've got Sarah.
So if you haven't got Sarah, go.
Are you tracked as well?
Yes, we are, yes. Ah. I'm just tired. Absolutely.
Oh, it's such a tough life. Having school is so tough.
Bro, I want to go back to school, bro. That's I hate life.
Go there.
Hi, Jacob.
Yeah, we're ready.
We're ready? All right, let's start. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Last week we went through chapter 10 in the Gospel of St. Mark, and Abuna covered the young rich man who had this encounter with Christ, and really one of the things that I think we can really take from that encounter is this burden of choice. Because in that encounter, Christ said to him, "What is it that you have learned in the law?" And in his answer, he said, "Love God with all your whole, with all your soul, with all your might." But God gave him a difficult commandment, and he said to him, "Go sell all what you have and come and follow me." And the burden of that choice, in that he was unable to make that choice to follow what he called the good teacher. See, in leaving, the young man did not follow what he wanted to follow, which was the good teacher. On the contrary, in leaving, he actually questioned who the teacher was. And in that, one of the church fathers, St. Augustine, describes this young rich ruler as he's leaving, and he says, he went away sad, bound up in his desires. He went away sad because he was chained by his desires, chained by the burden of choice that he was unable to make. He was unable to make that choice. To the extent that St. Augustine continues, he says, he went away sad, carrying a great burden of possessiveness upon his shoulders. It was this burden of being possessed by the wealth of this world. The Lord said to him, "Go sell everything and come and follow me." But he was unable to. And this inability, this burden of that choice that he is unable to make, St. Augustine says to us, he was bound up in his desire, and therefore he went away sad, carrying a great burden of possessiveness upon his shoulders. And therefore, Christ goes on, and we went through how he says that with God all things are possible, and he gave the disciples the example of the camel going through the eye of the needle. And in that, by merely having wealth, one tends to love this wealth inordinately. And therefore, you could easily see, or you could easily say, that the rich find faith exceptionally hard. That's what St. Augustine says to us. But Christianity actually doesn't leave the wealthy in despair. If one is able, in the midst of wealth, to turn from its powerful mystique and becomes able to exercise self-control, to exercise that choice that the young rich ruler was unable to exercise, to seek God and God alone, that person can be unbound. And that's exactly that parable of, or that example of the camel going through the eye of the needle. And I described to you how the eye of the needle was that small door that used to exist inside the town, the city's huge doors, gates. And how they used to close the gates at night. But the only way a late visitor or a late traveler can enter the city, it can only be entered through the eye of the needle, that small door. And that small door was designed to allow people to get in, but wasn't designed to allow animals and to allow especially animals that were carrying a lot of possessions to get in. People, when they used to travel at the time, they used to put all their possessions on the camel's back. That was their truck. That was their removalist. And therefore, if they arrived at a city late, they had one or two options. Either to leave the camel outside the city doors with all their possessions and walk in alone. Or if they wanted to go in and save at least the camel, they'd have to take off all the possessions off the back of the camel. And the camel would have to get on its knees, would have to crawl through the eye of the needle. And therefore it was possible for the camel to enter. But for the camel to enter, he needed to rid himself from the bound of desires, the bound of possessions, the bounds of the riches of this world. One of the church fathers tells us that richness in virtue is greater than richness in worldly goods. That is something that we all, a lot of the time, miss. And that those who seek to live the life of faith are blessed with having the wealth of the whole world loving them. From that conversation, we found that Christ is going to start, and this is where we stopped last week, he's going to start speaking to his disciples about his death and his resurrection. And as he finishes talking to them, we're going to see James and John make quite the request of Christ. They're going to ask him to sit on his left and right in his kingdom. Let's read from verse 32, 10:32. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Now they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside again and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And the third day he will rise again. See, ideally the disciples, having heard that Christ's death and the resurrection, should not have come up as a surprise for the disciples, because Christ clearly explains to them what would happen. Unfortunately, however, they actually didn't hear what he was saying. Jesus was telling them, I'm the Messiah. But they thought and they only saw the Messiah that they believed in. They only listened to the one that they were waiting for. And that Messiah for them was a great leader of a great army that would come and liberate them from the Roman rule and would bring on an earthly kingdom. And therefore they could only see a conquering king. He's speaking to them of the resurrection, but they only heard about death. And because Christ often spoke to them in parables, the disciples could have easily thought that his words on death and resurrection was just another parable, and therefore they did not listen to it. They did not try and comprehend what he's saying to them. Verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. See, both sons of Zebedee, James and John, they knew that among the disciples they were warmly loved by Christ. This is John the Beloved, no other John. This is John the Beloved, who was always able to sit next to Christ, who was always leaning on Christ. And John and James were the two that went up with Peter on Mount Tabor in the Transfiguration. And they were actually called the sons of Zebedee, or the sons of thunder, because they heard the voice of the Lord saying, this is my son, listen to him. And John and James are also the only other two disciples other than Peter whom Christ actually changed their name. And therefore they felt that alongside Peter, they were the disciples that were informed of Christ's hidden mysteries, of which the rest were unaware, because Christ, coming down from the Transfiguration, said to them, do not speak about this to anyone. Do not tell anyone that you saw Moses and Elijah. Do not tell anyone that you saw me in this glorious vision. And being called sons of thunder, of thinking that they were special, they came to Christ and asked him a question, saying to him, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. See, they sensed that they were loved by Christ, and that they had this ability to be able to ask him whatever they wanted. And therefore we find them coming to him and making this request. Verse 36, and he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? They said to him, grant us that we sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. See, when they're here asking Christ to sit in his kingdom, they had no idea what they were asking for. See, they were expecting him to enter into a kingdom. They weren't expecting him to go to the cross and to death. And even though they heard him say it many times, they could not understand. They didn't get clarity of what he was trying to teach them. They thought that he was going to bring about a visible kingdom, a kingdom that he would rule Jerusalem. And therefore, running after him here and catching up to him and asking and putting before him this request may seem as if everything just turned out exactly as they wanted. They're asking him about the privilege of first seats, being the chosen, being the ones that are special. And therefore they thought it was time for crowns, it was time for rewards. They thought that everything was done, and that this kingdom is about to happen, and Christ is about to rule. St. Augustine has this beautiful contemplation. And he says, ponder how profound this is. They were conferring with him about glory. He intended to precede loftiness with humility, and only through humility to ready the way for loftiness itself. See, his answer to them says to them, if you really want to be great, you need to drink of the cup. You need to drink of the cup. Yeah, see, that cup is struggle and suffering. You need to humble yourself. And they weren't expecting to hear that. The only way to glory is through humility. They are seeking earthly glory, but he is not talking about that. Because our homeland is not here on earth, it's in heaven. And therefore, the way to glory is dying with Christ. The way to glory is suffering with Christ. The way to glory is abiding with him eternally. And it's as if Christ, when he says to them, will you be able to drink the cup, is saying to them, do you seek the right homeland? Are you seeking eternity, or are you seeking this love? And it's as if he's saying to them, you do not understand what you're asking. Because you are talking about crowns and rewards and privileges and honors. And I'm actually telling you that what you're asking for that you don't understand is an earthly kingdom, and it's not a kingdom I'm coming to offer. I'm here for an eternal kingdom. He responds to them and he says to them, you do not know what you ask. You do not know what you ask. You don't understand. You don't know what you're asking for. You are talking about an earthly kingdom, and I said nothing about an earthly kingdom. There has been no announcement, there has been no promise of an earthly kingdom or of a visible kingdom on earth. Those of you that can go through the Gospels, go through everything that was said, at no point do we find Christ speaking anything about a visible kingdom. And therefore, you don't know what you're asking because you don't understand. And the other side to the question, you do not know what you ask because you're actually asking for these things at the wrong time. The timing was wrong. For this is not the time for crowns. This is the time for suffering, for struggles, for toil, for battles. For he asks them the question, are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Are you able to make the sacrifice? Are you able to suffer? See, St. Augustine says to us, the meaning of the cup is the cup of humility and suffering. Are you able to drink from it? Are you able and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? He calls his death baptism. And it's as if Christ is actually foretelling us that his death is the baptism for humanity through which he purifies humanity. This great purification that the whole world would be purified with. They said to him, we are able. They said to him, we can, not knowing what they actually said, but looking to obtain these things that they were asking for. They said we can because they thought that they're about to receive a kingdom, and for the sake of this earthly kingdom, we can do anything. To the extent that St. John Chrysostom tells us that Christ here is foretelling the disciples what happens. It's as if he's telling them, you shall be worthy of martyrdom. You shall suffer the things I have suffered. You shall end your life with a death from violence, and in this you shall share with me in that cup, because that's exactly what happened to the disciples. They all were martyred. And one of the beautiful contemplations that you read when Christ talks about his death as a baptism, St. John Chrysostom actually says something beautiful. He says, for him death was like baptism, because the baptized, when they immersed their heads in the water, the old humanity is buried as in a tomb, and we all sink, the old humanity sinks in the water, only to be raised a new air, a new creation. But St. John Chrysostom says it's also he who actually goes underwater in the baptism can very easily lift his head up from the water. The same way that for Christ, going to death and coming out of death was a natural thing. It wasn't something that had any difficulty. For him it was just like going into water and coming out of water. Going into death and coming and overcoming death was very easy for God. It's easy for God to bury the old humanity and to lift up and display the new creation. And St. John Chrysostom actually continues and he says, Christ called his crucifixion a cup and his death a baptism. He called the cross a cup because he came to it with pleasure. You come to the cup. At the time, the cup used to be a cup of wine. And drinking of the wine is something that is done for pleasure with the food. For St. John says to us that Christ pulled the cross, the cup, because he was coming to it with pleasure. Christ was happy to die for us. The pleasure of saving the world, that was no pain for Christ, but rather the pleasure of offering his love. In his death, he called it a baptism, because by it he cleansed the world. By his death, he cleansed the whole world. And like I said to you here, he says, for just as the one who is baptized in water easily rises up because the nature of the water possesses no hindrance, so too Christ rose with greater ease because he had gone down into death. And this is why he calls his death a baptism. Because the same way that the water cannot hinder he who is in the water from getting out, death could not hinder Christ from overcoming it. For Christ continues and says to them, you will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I'm baptized with, you will be baptized. He's foretelling them exactly what's going to happen to them. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those to whom it is prepared. It is for those whom shall be able to exercise that ability to make that choice. Those who will choose Christ. Those that will suffer with him. Those that will rise with him. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, you know those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall be, my fingers had to, yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. This is the cup of humility that Christ comes to call us for. Those that want to be first need to seek to be last. And in this he presents himself again, and he reinforces the fact that he has come to give his life as a ransom. Ransom, yes, we are captive, and he is going to set us free. He's come to give us his life. He's come to set us free. He's come to cancel sin. He's come to give us power over sin. Finally, at the end of the book of chapter 10, we find Jesus heals a blind man called Bartimaeus. Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he's calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So Jesus answered and said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. Then Jesus said to him, Go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. St. Augustine goes out of his way to contemplate on the fact that St. Mark names this man, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. And St. Augustine says it's actually strange that both his name and his father's name is recorded in the Gospel of St. Mark. Because unlike all the many cases of healing which had been performed by Christ, you don't find that the names of those who were healed mentioned. And therefore, he says, it means that this man, this Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, must have fallen from some great position of great responsibility. He was a famous man. The son of a famous man. Someone who fell from great prosperity, but now was regarded as the object of the most notorious and most remarkable wretchedness, which is he has become a beggar. St. Mark goes out of his way to tell us that he was begging. When he describes him, sat by the road begging in verse 46. And therefore, it is easy to see this wretched helplessness as the state of humanity. We were like this Bartimaeus. We were the sons and daughters of Christ. We were actually in positions of great prosperity as humans, but we fell. And in such a fall, we become blind. To the extent that this is how St. Augustine puts it. He said, the wretched helplessness of fallen humanity is seen symbolically in the blindness of Bartimaeus. Humanity had fallen from such an amazing position to become blind, unable to see Christ. But Christ comes and he asks, what do you want me to do for you? He will save us. And in saving us, he will do for us everything that we need, everything that he has promised us of. But that all depends on our willingness. Our willingness to hear him, our willingness to recognize him, our willingness to call out to him and say to him, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us. This is why the church keeps on saying, Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. It is that cry of faith that we seek from Christ to save us. Now, Jericho, when we look at the actual location, was actually a very popular resort city in Judea. It was actually rebuilt by Herod the Great, and it wasn't far from the River Jordan. And Jesus, on his way to Jerusalem, had to naturally enter through Jericho. Beggars were actually a common sight in most towns at the time of Christ. And because at the time of Christ, anybody that had any kind of job, the job needed physical abilities. Therefore, anyone that was disabled or had a crippling disease had no choice but to beg. And this is why, for the beggar to be known and recognized, he must have been someone of a great or of a fame. And to call son of David, it was actually a popular way of calling the Messiah. This is why Christ says to him, your faith has your faith has made you well. Faith in that I am Christ, the Messiah. In coming to Christ, we need to have that boldness of faith. That boldness of not being shy of our fallen state, of our sin, but to come and seek for Christ, to delete it, for Christ to save us, for Christ to make us well, so that we may be able to see Him. And in seeing Him, we may receive our sight once more. Glory be to God forever and ever. Amen. Any questions? حلو خالص. تضحك ليه؟ He's going to share something. What are you going to share? قول يا باشا. طيب. Standing up is not a problem. Did you turn it off? All right, let's stand up to pray. هو already قفلها. You didn't? Okay. I thought you just turned it off. طب ما انت بتعرف تطفيه. طب let's stand up to pray.